Hey guys, how's it going? This is Natnator. Welcome back to your weekly dose of creepypasta. I want to get right to it since we've had some longer intros lately, so let's get right into thanking the members of the Coven over on Patreon. Shoutouts as always to the Disciples, Tiffany, Backwards D-Dog, Vera Ohio, Jelly, Amberly Perry, Teddy Dog, Brooklyn Gonzalez, Patrick White, Jacob Stringfellow, Backapuff, Jacob Nasa, and Bubbly Panda. Thank you guys so much for your support. I really appreciate what you guys are doing to help me out with this little YouTube thing. Now, as always, turn out the lights, get comfortable, and let the story begin.
Will you be with me when the time comes?
Caitlin asked. Her voice was soft and cracking due to dehydration. Even with the saline solution being pumped through the IV, she was still far too weak to talk properly. Her lips were white and cracking, like the earth in Death Valley. Henry tightened his grip on her hand, not by much, but to acknowledge her request. "What happened out there?" he asked.
I will tell you, but first I need some ice. Feed it to me as I talk so I can at least keep my mouth wet enough to let you know what I saw.
Caitlin's breathing was labored. This and the dehydration caused her to talk much slower than she normally would. Henry released her hand and went to get some water. He came back with the little pink bucket filled to overflowing with little square ice cubes. Caitlin's mouth opened slightly, and he slipped one in. He noticed even her tongue was a pallid pink, almost white. Once the ice was in her mouth, he reclaimed her hand. It felt like leather. Her face looked 50.
I decided to go into the mountains for the weekend. The sun was bright and it would be a great camping trip. I'd been to the Flatirons many times, so I decided I would go more toward the Devil's Backbone.
Caitlin paused here, her thin hand reaching for the little pink bucket. Henry saw what she was trying to do and fed her another ice chip. Her eyes closed with her mouth as she let the water slowly trickle down her throat. Henry took her hand once more. This time he noticed she was still wearing her ring. It seemed like it should have fallen off long ago. The band was far too large for the little meat she had on her hand, but it still would have a little trouble getting over the knuckle. Not much, but enough to keep it on.
I knew that area was known to have covens. There was a community that lived there, which everyone knew was into that shit. Most people thought they were into Wicca, but a few said it was much worse than that. That some were into darker things. Things which would make the devil blush. I never believed any of that stuff would work, I told you before. But I was wrong. I saw things which made me believe, made me know that something else can be channeled by those people.
The heart monitor started to raise. It was the first time Henry had paid it any mind. His own heart started to quicken just from the sound. His hand tightened on her withered remains. The only reason he loosened his grip was due to the weak groan she let slip from those cracked lips.
Sorry,
he said.
It's okay. I don't think I have much left in me tonight. But you need to know what happened. It all happened that first night. I set up my tent. God, I wish you would have come with me. I was so upset with you, though.
Henry looked down at her wedding band once more. The matching one he wore in his left hand felt like a sham for the past few days. Now it was even worse. Now that his wife had been through so much, and he wasn't able to be there with her because of his stupid actions. Tears welled in his eyes as he felt the soft touch of her dry skin and close around the back of his hand.
I forgive you. It was a moment of weakness. I just wish it wouldn't have been like that. But don't worry about it now. Just let me finish.
She pointed toward the bucket again, and he slipped another piece of ice into her barely open mouth. Once she was trying desperately to get the ice to melt, he had a chance to wipe his eyes, his own hands shaking more than hers.
I had my tent up in no time. The sun was going down, and I started to hear something. At first, I didn't know what it could be, but after a while, I was able to make out it was people. It sounded like they were singing, which is fine. Colorado is a strange place. But I figured it may not be a bad idea to see if I could find where they were. If people were out there, maybe they would want to talk, and I have to admit, I was feeling lonely.
Her words were broken by a cough that was drier than some papyrus left over from ancient Egyptian times. Drier even than her voice, but not much. Her face gnarled as she coughed, and she tried to sit up, but she was far too weak and in far too much pain to do so.
"Sit down, Caitlin," Henry said. "You don't need to put yourself through any more pain than you're already in."
With his help, she was able to lie back down and get comfortable. Well, at least as comfortable as the situation would allow. It took a few minutes before she was able to return to her story, time in which Henry found to smooth her hair and give her a kiss on the forehead. She returned his affection with a smile that broke her lips open slightly. A thick blood started to seep from the cracks. It was so dark it looked more black than red. He wiped away the blood, and no more came from the crevices.
"It was a long walk. That should have been the first thing I noticed was wrong. They were in the woods, and you know how far away the woods are from the backbone. It took me 10 minutes just to get to the tree line. It was also closer to that community, the one where the witches live, but I didn't think anything of it. I just kept walking to see who was singing and what they were saying. There was more than one person. I could make out that much at least. The wind picked up, and I heard a tink-tink sound. I shined the flashlight into the woods and saw bottles hanging from the trees. None of them looked like any of the others, but there was one thing they all had in common. Each had a little piece of meat on a string hanging inside and was sealed with wax. There must have been 100 bottles in all. Blue, green, clear and frosted.
Once more she pointed to the ice bucket, and Henry knew the sign well enough to feed her another chip. The rhythmic beeping had slowed again, but it still seemed a little jerky. At times it would spike with a few rapid beeps, and then fall to the normal rhythm. Her hands would tighten on his. Not hard. Henry didn't think she was capable of using too much energy to make the squeeze hard, which made his heart sink a little deeper into his chest.
"When I was in the woods, I still couldn't make out what they were saying. But not because it was too faint, but because they were speaking in a different language. I saw a fire, and it pulled me closer like a moth. There must have been 10 people dancing around that fire, each of them singing that strange song. I couldn't see if they were all singing because they were wearing masks, but it sure sounded as if they were all singing. The masks were pure white and contrasted well with the black robes they were wearing. The only other parts that were white were the gloves they wore and their sneakers. I didn't think any of them had seen me, so I kept moving closer. Not close enough to feel the heat from the fire, but close enough to see what they were doing. I didn't want them to know I was there. I can't really explain why, but I knew it would be bad if they knew I was watching.
Henry swallowed hard. His throat was going dry. So was Caitlin's. This time, after he had given her a piece of ice, he took one as well. The heart monitor had picked up its beeping again. Although it seemed impossible, Caitlin seemed to be getting even drier. Her hands felt like sandpaper, and her eyes looked smaller than the sockets they were in. Her voice had gotten even hoarser.
They stopped singing, and one of those people in the blank white faces came forward with a bottle. They put it above the fire, hanging it from some makeshift gallows, which was erected above the flames. A chain held it above the flames, and it wasn't long before the glass started to have a film on the inside. I thought it was a film at least, but it was smoke. Then they popped a hole into the wax which sealed it and removed the cork. The smoke came bubbling out, but didn't drift up toward the moon. Instead, it fell to the ground and started to build on itself. I know it sounds crazy, but that is what happened. It happened like that until it made the figure of a man.
Caitlin's eyes closed. If it wasn't for the heart monitor, Henry would have thought she died. His hand gently rubbed her arm until she opened her eyes once more. When he first started to move his hand up her thin arm, she was disturbed by the dry, scratchy sound it had made. The figure stood beside the fire, and the group started to ask it questions. Strange questions, like, what do you know of the afterlife? Or, when will this trial be over? Things that meant nothing to me, but must have been very important to others. It dawned on me that this was a ghost they were talking to, trying to get answers that no one from the living world would be able to answer. It was frightening, but it got worse when they asked the last question I stuck around to hear. How long can we keep our coven a secret? And to this, the ghost replied that I was watching them, and a smoky tendril pointed toward my direction. I didn't stick around to see what they would do if they caught me. You know how fast I can run, or at least could until I got here. Still, the people in the masks were just as quick, if not quicker. I was stumbling through the trees and broken down branches when I heard them coming after me. I got out of the woods and was able to run faster. It was the fastest I had ever run, but it wasn't fast enough. One of them was able to get a hold of my hair. I jerked free, but the hand that was holding me must have come away with a handful of my hair. After that, I didn't stop until I was safe in my car and locked the doors. Again, she closed her eyes. Henry could see how much it was taking for her to tell this story. He wished she would just stop, just relax for a little. But he knew that would be the last thing she would probably do. Her face was thinner than before, cheekbones protruding so far. Her face looked like a skull with a thin cloth over it. He gave her another ice chip.
When I got to my car, I wasn't able to start it. I don't know why, I didn't care why. The only thing I wanted to do was to get out of there before that group found me. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I ran for as long as I could. But I don't think I was able to get away. Even though I hadn't seen any of them, I could still feel their eyes on me. I was still miles from any other town than the one I wanted to get away from. But I couldn't run anymore. My lungs were burning so badly, and so were my legs. And once I sat down, I had fallen asleep. I couldn't help it. A wave of tiredness crashed over me and I was out. It wasn't until morning that I woke up and was able to start running again. By the time someone had found me, I must have looked terrible. They took me here and left me once I'd gotten checked in. At least they were nice enough to stay with me until they knew I was in good hands. The pause was longer this time. The heart monitor had slowed so much that Henry was amazed she was still talking. The beeps were about 2 seconds apart. Far too long for someone to live and still be able to talk. I know they cursed me. They must have. Haven't you noticed that I've been getting worse? Even in the short time it took me to tell you that story. I must look like I'm dead already. But there are still some things I need to tell you. I want you to live your life again. Mourn me, but don't mourn me for long. I'm sure that girl you were sleeping with would be eager to get back with you. Sorry, that was mean. I don't want you to remember me that way. Lily was her name, right? Be with her if you want, but please, just wait a little bit. Tears rolled down both of their faces. Henry couldn't believe she was saying what she was saying. Caitlin couldn't believe it either, but she was more upset about dying. It wouldn't be long now and she knew it. I have always loved you, Henry. Even when I had walked in on you, I was hurt, but it hurt because I loved you so much. Please, do what you have to. The monitor flatlined. Nurses rushed in and checked Caitlin. It was clear she was dead, and there was nothing that they could do to revive her. When the nurse had pushed Henry away, 3 of her fingers snapped off in his hand, one of which still had the wedding band on it. No blood came from the missing fingers. It had all dried up. When the nurse pushed on her chest to revive her, dust came out of her cracked lips. There was nothing they could do, and everyone in the room knew it. So they did the only thing they felt they could do. Give Henry a few more minutes with his dead wife. I'm sorry, honey, he said over the dried corpse, which had just told the story of her last days. A story of fear and pain. I never found Lily attractive. We had sex because it was a part of a spell we were doing. He reached into his blazer pocket
and produced a small bottle with a piece of meat hanging in it. But don't worry, you and I will be together for a long time. The bottle began to fill with the smoke as he chanted in that language she couldn't understand in the woods. Once her spirit was in the bottle, he pushed the cork deep in the mouth. He would have to wait to put the wax over it, but that was okay. She wouldn't get out before then. As he left the room, he gave her body one last kiss on the forehead and dropped the fingers on her chest, leaving the ring which symbolized their vows to be together, for better or worse.